I'll be honest with you up front. I'm not great at quick math. I'm not a numbers person. Quick math, fast math, it doesn't really matter. As a matter of fact, the most stressful thing in school is when my math teacher would have a random student come up to the board and do a math problem in front of the entire class. Seriously, I'm not joking. I can't think of a single thing in my life that caused as much anxiety as that moment when I was in front of the class with my mind going completely blank. Because of that weakness, I can sympathize with Peter a little in Matthew chapter 18, because essentially Jesus throws a random math problem his way. Let me set the scene for you. The popular teachers of Jesus' day would forgive someone up to 3 times, which seems fair, pretty much a 3 strikes and you're out policy. But if you don't have to read too far into the Gospels to see that Jesus was cut from a different cloth, especially compared to the religious leaders of that day. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus was teaching on the subject of forgiveness when one of his disciples chimes in and asks this question in verse 21. It says, "Then Peter came to him and asked, 'Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times?'" Now, I believe Peter is actually playing the role of teacher's pet with this question, because forgiving someone 7 times was obviously a lot more than the cultural standard of 3 set by the religious leaders. Peter might be expecting Jesus to say, "Wow, Peter, you are so holy. In fact, maybe you should teach on forgiveness and I'll sit down and take notes." Of course, that's not at all how Jesus responds. He gets to Peter's heart and inner motivation, which he does so well and effectively with not only Peter, but he also does that with me. Peter's inner motivation for asking this question kind of reminds me of questions that I've gotten as a high school pastor. A high schooler has come up to me before and said, "How far is too far?" And most of the time, this was in the context of the physical nature of a dating relationship. How far is too far before it's considered a sin? Here's the thing, I don't think the motivation behind the question is because of a sincere desire to be obedient. It's mostly because they want to know how far they can go before they've crossed some lines, before it's considered a sin. And I think Peter's heart reflects the heart of the question I've gotten from high school students before. He doesn't ask, "How often should I forgive?" because he's so interested in being forgiving. He asks because he's far more interested in knowing when he can stop forgiving people. Jesus responds to all of this by telling him this in verse 22. He says, "No, not 7 times," Jesus replied, "but 70 times 7. Now Peter's left thinking about what Jesus just said, and here's the part where he has to do some quick math. And he's probably thinking, "That's a little over the top, Jesus. That seems just a little extreme." See, Jesus isn't saying that we should have a counter and we should keep track of each time we forgive someone like we're counting our steps. Jesus wanted Peter, and he wants all of us to know that there is no limit in which we should forgive someone, because there is no limit to God's forgiveness to you. C.S. Lewis, he says it this way: "To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you." See, that last one is tough, isn't it? If you're like me, you want so desperately to compare the inexcusable in your life to the inexcusable that we see in the world today, and then come to the conclusion that my stuff isn't nearly as bad as the stuff that I see out there. I'm good. The truth is, Jesus died on the cross for the inexcusable in my life. My sin put him on the cross, and it was on the cross that Jesus said, "Father, forgive them." So, how many times should we forgive? As many times as the Father has forgiven us.